November 5th is coming up quick, and you may be confused about some of the economic plans that both of the candidates are putting together and putting out there. So what we're going to do today is add some clarity and let you know who will steer this economy to success. In this highly political environment where people are fighting tooth and nail against each other and really a lot of smearing, name calling, it's the same way that it's been for years, but it seems to get worse and worse with the advent of social media and all these things. What we're looking to do today is really give you a neutral analysis on the different economic plans that are out there from each candidate, walk you through the ins and outs of those, and let's talk about where these plans will help, where they will hurt, and who they're for, right? Because at the end of the day, you want to make an informed decision when you vote on who's going to be the best for the economy, because that's probably the #1 issue today. Before we start with VP Harris's details or Donald Trump's details on what they're looking to do, we really need to look at what's happening today. No matter what candidate gets in, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act is setting to have certain pieces of it that will expire. So no matter who gets in, they're going to have to figure out, do they want to keep this plan? Do they want to add to it, or do they want to let things sunset? And let's just take a look at some of these things, right? The #1 thing that's going to change is the tax brackets in general. So if these aren't made permanent, those tax brackets will then move up, and so everybody's tax rates will go up at the end of 2025. So that's something that needs to get addressed. Secondly, the corporate tax rate was made permanent. That went from 35% down to 21%, but we'll get into that a little bit later. The standard deduction for people was increased, right? It was more than doubled. It went from $6,350 in 2017 up to today in 2024, it's $14,600. So that standard deduction change may stay, it may be made permanent, or it may go away. These are things that they have to tackle. Something for small business owners, which was a big help for a lot of small businesses, is QBI. That's qualified business income. You as a business owner, as long as you had qualifying income, would be able to deduct 20% for small businesses. So these are some of the things that can change, right? And there's also depreciation. So there's a lot of things that will happen regardless of who gets in. So all these pieces are up for grabs in this election cycle. So let's get into VP Harris's, some of her economic plans. One of her main proposals is to build 3 million new homes. This is to combat low supply and high prices. And that's something we see across the board. Inventory in real estate is very low. Homes sell really quickly, even with high interest rates, right? I think the thought a while back was that high interest rates may slow the buying. What it's done is it's created an affordability problem for a lot of people. You may have been able to qualify for a mortgage and buy a $400,000 home back, when interest rates were 3%, but now if interest rates are 6 or 7%, you may not qualify for that same home. And so the affordability of housing is a challenge. What you have to remember when you look at a plan like this is that sounds great. Let's build 3 million more homes. How do we get the money to the people building it? How do we get the money to the people buying it? Who's administering this? What states are actually getting the money? What localities are getting the money? Who's getting more than the other one? So there's going to be a lot of fighting around a plan like this, a lot of horse trading, obviously, in Congress if these things come to pass. So you got to keep your eye out, not just for the plan, but what are the details specific to that plan. Next, the vice president is looking to give a $25,000 first-time homebuyer tax credit. This is to assist in down payments. Again, these are things that I think need to be looked at. Moreover, a $25,000 credit or giving somebody $25,000 is not necessarily going to make homes more affordable. And on the back end of both of these things is how the vice president plans to pay for these giveaways. And so we'll talk about that. She's looking to incentivize builders on building affordable houses. So again, this goes back to a lot of government intervention and a lot of laying their hands or tipping their hands on the scale of how we do things in the economy. So this is something you want to be aware of. There's also changes in law so that large investors cannot inflate or change the real estate rental prices. Again, looking at price controls and will those really work, and also eliminating tax breaks for people that own over 50 rentals. One of her plans that I think would add some real stimulus to the economy is to increase the child tax credit. Now, currently, the child tax credit is a flat $2,000 across the board for children. That went up from $1,000 prior during the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. Now, the vice president has looked at saying in the first year, right, the first year that you have a child, we're going to give you, the government, $6,000 per child in that first year. And then what they look to do is in years 2 through 5, that credit go down to $3,500, and then from 6 on, that would be a $3,000 credit. So bumping that up is helpful, especially in an economy right now where inflation has been so rampant. The cost of goods has gone up so much. So this could potentially help a lot of parents and help foster growth, because we also do have a declining population, and we need to think about, for future generations, who's going to pay the social benefits, right? If all the workers age out and there's not enough young people coming up through the workforce to support Social Security, what's the long-term effects of that? Vice President Harris also looked at eliminating taxes on tips. Now, that's also something that the former president came out and said. And who said it first? Donald Trump's on tape talking about no tax on tips. The vice president is also saying the same thing. I think for people that are working those service industry jobs, this would be a huge benefit for them. Most of the people working in those types of jobs are either doing that as a second job or are also living paycheck to paycheck. And so any amount that they can keep in their pocket without having to give it away would be extremely helpful. A couple other plans that the vice president has economically is to look to stop and block the corporate investor in housing, to keep them from buying up. And we're hearing these stories more and more of these big groups that come in and buy up housing. They'll buy up tracts of housing before they're even built, so that they're creating rental income for their corporation down the road, right? And so you hear these stories, the vice president is looking to block that. She's also looking to cap insulin costs at $35 out of pocket, and total prescription costs being no more than $2,000 a year. Again, this sounds great on paper. How do they get it done? Right? And this is always going to be the thing, is how do they get these things passed through Congress? Because you can say almost anything you want on the campaign trail, but to put it into action, we have to look at how do they get that done. And I think, lowering insulin costs would be a great thing. I think lowering prescription costs would be a great thing. How do we do it? And how is it paid for? Looking at supporting businesses in low-income communities and underserved areas, that's already inside of the opportunity zones that are inside the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. So again, these might be things that the Harris campaign is hinting at that they would keep. And then in the big rollout of this plan, the way that they're looking to pay for all these things could be a 25% tax on unrealized capital gains. And this is a scary thought for the economy in general, because yes, it may not affect you directly, meaning it's not going to come from your portfolio because you don't have $10 million or $100 million in unrealized capital gains, huge assets under management. But for the people that do, you can be sure that a lot of them will be trying to move their assets offshore or selling out their assets to get away from this tax, because you're talking about 25 million plus on a $100 million portfolio that may or may not be liquid. So these are things that when we look at the overall scheme of how do we fix the economy, what are some things to spur economic growth, you have to look at the unintended consequences of the ways that they're looking to pay for these things. Now, former President Trump's main focus is to keep the economy or make the economy stronger, trying to bring it back to the way it was in his previous presidency. One of the things that will stay as a result of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act is the doubling of the standard deduction, which is great for a lot of people that are in an economic position or in a position where they don't really have have enough to itemize on their taxes. So having that double of the standard deduction is great for them. But they're also seeking to keep in SALT. What SALT is state and local taxes. Prior to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, people that were in high income tax states and high property tax states were able to take a deduction of the state and local taxes that they paid. Think about New York, New Jersey, California. All of the people that were in those states that maybe earned pretty good incomes also paid a lot of tax to their state and local governments. So they were able to write that off of the federal tax return, and they would get a credit for those monies. Now, under the current way that things are done under a Tax Cut and Jobs Act, they are not allowed to do that, right? They have to go with either the standard deduction or have an itemized deduction, but they're capped on what they can write off on state and local taxes up to $10,000. So that may remain the way it is. So again, when we look at these economic plans and the thoughts of it, you have to think about who they favor and where it works for you, right? You may be in one of those high tax states and you may want SALT to come back. You may want that deduction to be higher for yourself. But if you're a business owner, you may want to keep the QBI, that qualified business income, that you're able to take a 20% deduction right now on your current taxes for qualified business income. So looking through and thinking about those plans, it's important. One of the other things that former President Trump is looking to do is to take the corporate tax rate again even lower, down from 21% where it is currently, and bringing it down to 15%. Part of the reason is to spur more growth here in America and bring more companies back here and make foreign companies want to invest more here in America as well. By bringing those tax rates down and becoming in the top of the G7 rather than down at the bottom of the G7 makes us even more favorable from a tax perspective, and having more companies bring their business over here and have their headquarters over here, it spurs more growth, it spurs more jobs in the economy, and that's part of the way that President Trump will look to bring in more tax revenue from new companies coming over here. One of the other things that he's looked at is imposing more tariffs on China and foreign domestic production. I'll just give you a little history on tariffs. Tariffs started back in 1790, and between 1790 and 1860, the rate on imports or things coming into the country was anywhere between 20 and 60%. Now, this was revenue for the government, and it was the main funding revenue that the government had. Prior to the 1900s, there was no income tax. So in 1861, between 1861 and 1933, that tariff rate went to a flat 50%. But in 1934 to present, that was lowered, and it was lowered down to about 5%. Now, there are certain things where they will impose higher tariffs to protect the American economy or protect certain segments of the economy. And the reason they were able to take it down from 50% to 5% is because they imposed income taxes, right? And so once they imposed income taxes, the government really didn't need the tariff money to run the government anymore. One of the things that President Trump is looking to do is to impose tariffs to keep manufacturing here in this country. Former President Trump is also looking to drill more, right? He talks about drill, baby, drill. He looks at inflation and the causes of inflation being mostly because of the cost of energy going up. If we look at it, the cost of diesel fuel has gone up dramatically, right? And over these last 3 years, when we want to get things from one place to another, we have to transport them. And if the cost of energy has gone up, the cost of transportation goes up, which then translates to higher prices in food and other areas. And so we see this inflationary pressure because of higher fuel costs, higher energy costs. And so one of the things that President Trump is looking to do is say, look, let's open it back up. Let's get more energy into the economy to help ease the pressure and bring down some of this inflated prices. He's also looking at the retirement age to keep that from rising for Social Security, right? Our full retirement age today for somebody like me is 67. That used to be 65 and has steadily increased. They may look to push that even further because Social Security is under a lot of pressure. President Trump wants to keep that from rising. He's also looking to remove, like we talked about before, no tax on tips, but he also wants to and tax on overtime pay, which again, I think is something directed to the person that is working multiple jobs or the person that's taking in a lot of overtime to try to make ends meet. And so what he's saying is, look, if these people are trying to do their best to support their family and make the money on this hourly basis and they're working more than a regular week's worth, let them not have to pay tax on that. And I think that would be a big boost for the economy in general. He's also looking to, like we talked about before, create opportunity zones for foreign companies to relocate to the US and also create lower regulatory restrictions on manufacturing for US-based companies. So all of those things are former President Trump's way of looking at or trying to reduce overall pressure on the economy and spur more growth in the economy. So looking at both plans, you can see there are some good things in both plans. And the question is, when they get into office, whomever it is, can they get those ideas passed through Congress? Have they fully vetted or thought out the unintended consequences of those actions, right? So one of the things that President Trump keeps talking about is putting a 200% tariff on Chinese goods. If it went through, that would hurt everyday Americans in their pockets. But I think that that's probably more of a bargaining tool than an actual policy that he's looking to implement. And if he does, it might be something more short term. But again, thinking through those things, would that affect your overall pocket? Would that hurt the economy or would it help the economy? So these are the things you want to really look at. When you go to that ballot box, you should know the issues that are causing you to vote. You should know your candidate's position and vote for that candidate that you think is going to help you and your family get into the best economic position. And regardless of who gets into office, the more important thing that you have to realize is that things will continue going on, right? So if the person you wanted didn't get in, the country's still going to be going, right? And it's not going to be the end of the country no matter what candidate gets in. So you really have to think about what matters most, and that's your own personal economy. How do you really look at all those different pieces that are going on, look at the monies that are coming into your family's world, and look at the monies that are going out, and take a hard look and say, hey, these are the things that we have to do, or these are the areas that we can change. And if you're in a position where you're able to save cash flow and you're able to stay ahead even in these tough times where other people are feeling the crunch, now is a great opportunity to look at the diversification of that cash and where you're putting it. So I think overall, no matter who gets in, you need to have the right mindset going forward, that it's not the end of the country, it's just the next election cycle. And if you don't like who got in, you can still petition to your local government and you're at the local level and try to affect change locally more than anything else. I really appreciate you watching this video through. Give it a like button if you enjoyed the content. Share it with somebody that you think needs some of this information, and check out our next video here.